Hey, what's up everyone? This is Music Tech Help Guy and welcome to part 25 of my Logic Pro 11 Essentials course. In this video, we're going to dive into the mixer. I'm going to give you a full overview of the mixer and the channel strip components. We'll also touch on other topics such as using channel strip settings, how to save them and how to recall them, how to copy and paste them, how to add effects, audio effects inserts in the mixer, how to load up MIDI effects inserts, how to load third-party and stock instruments and effects. We'll talk about panning and the difference between stereo pan and balancing. And we'll also dive into digital audio signals and metering. And we'll also talk about the stereo output and master VCA. Hey, what's up everyone? I just need to quickly jump in here and tell you about today's sponsor, Boombox. Boombox is a revolutionary new tool for musicians, bands, composers, solo artists, producers, and mixing engineers. Imagine if Dropbox, WeTransfer, Google Drive, SoundCloud, and Bandcamp had a baby and then pepper in some really cool AI tools. That's what you get with Boombox. With Boombox, you can securely store your files and projects, invite collaborators who can upload their own files and leave time-stamped feedback on your projects, manage royalty splits and draw up contracts, create a promotional artist page to share your music with the world, network and collaborate with over 60,000 users already on the Boombox platform, and use their creative AI tools to split stems, remove vocals, generate MIDI musical ideas, and it can even assist you in writing lyrics. If you're finally ready to give Dropbox the boot, head over to boombox.io today and sign up to get 4 GB of free storage. Okay, so let's quickly review how to access the mixer. One way to do it is to click right here, and this will open up the mixer in the main window, in the editors area of the main window. The way I prefer to toggle the mixer is to press X. This will hide and show the mixer. And you can click and drag right here on the boundary of the mixer to make it larger or smaller. So if you just want to see faders, you can do something like that. If you want to see all the other channel strip components, you can pull it up. Another really important thing to keep in mind is what area in Logic's main window is in focus. Right now, you can see there's this blue boundary around the mixer, and this is telling us that the mixer is in focus. So any key commands or shortcuts I press will go to the mixer. Whereas if I click over here in the tracks area, now the tracks area is in focus and my key commands are going to be going to the tracks area. So anytime you want to use key commands in the mixer, make sure to click here in the mixer first to bring it into focus. And if you want to jump back to the tracks editor, click there to bring it into focus. Now, one more way to bring up the mixer is you can press Command 2. This will bring up the mixer in its own separate window. This is really helpful if you have multiple displays and maybe you want to have the tracks area on one display and then you want to have a separate mixer on another display. And if you want to close this out, you can just click here to close it out, or you can press Command W to close out that window. Now, you might notice in your project that in the mixer, each track or each channel in the mixer has a separate color. However, out in the tracks area, there are no track colors. Well, you can actually show track color bars to make the color of the track in the mixer match the tracks area. All you have to do is right click or control click over here, and then you can go down to track header components, and then you're going to show track color bars. Another way to do this without having to right click or control click is to select a track and press Option T to bring up your track options. And then you can hide and show your color bars, among other things like your track numbers. There's a groove track, there's track alternatives. So this is a quick way to hide and show your track header components. So now that we have the track colors shown, let's change our track color. Now, I showed you in a previous video that you can drag over regions and press Option C to bring up the color palette, and then you can colorize your regions. But if you want to colorize the tracks, what you'll have to do is select one or more tracks. If you are selecting multiples, you can hold Shift to select multiples, and then right click or control click over here and select Assign Track Color. So maybe I want the track color for all of my drums to be this sort of dark orange color. And then maybe I want all of my synthesizers to be another color. So that's the region color. But if I right click and select assign track color, I can select the same color for the synth tracks. I can do the same thing for the track color bars. And maybe I'll just keep the effects here in blue. And so now when I go back to my mixer, you'll see that all of those track color bars from the tracks area also show up here in the mixer. And honestly, I think this bright green is a little hard to look at. So let's go ahead and change this to maybe something a little darker, something a little easier to see in the mixer there. Next, let's talk about which types of tracks are MIDI-based versus which types of tracks are audio-based. It's pretty easy to see in the tracks area because tracks where you have MIDI regions and step sequencer pattern regions or session player regions, these are all MIDI-based tracks, whereas if you see a waveform, like with these tracks, these are all audio-based tracks. So even though I told you in a previous video there are 4 types of tracks, really there's just 2 main types of tracks. Your MIDI-based tracks, your pattern tracks, and your session player tracks are all really just software instrument tracks or MIDI-based software instrument tracks, whereas your mic or line or guitar or bass tracks are all audio-based. So if you go into the mixer and look at the input section here, this is a pretty good giveaway whether a track is audio-based or MIDI-based. If you see a software instrument in this insert slot, like right here, we're using Quick Sampler. Here we're using Retro Synth. And here we're using the ES2. And here we're using Alchemy. All of these green tabs, these green inserts, are a dead giveaway that that is a MIDI-based track because the input of the track is powered by a software instrument. Whereas audio tracks are just going to have an input slot here where you can choose what input you want to record from, whether that be stereo or mono. And another thing you can do in addition to colorizing the tracks is you can set the icon for each of the tracks. So for example, let's say I want my trap hi-hats and tom, like maybe these tom fills here, I want to have a tom icon. You can right click or control click on the icon, and then you can choose a particular icon for that track. Maybe for the trap hi-hats, I'll go to drums and I'll add in a hi-hat icon. Maybe for the synthesizers, maybe I'll go to keyboards and I'll choose a synthesizer icon here. And you can do that for all of the tracks in your project. And those icons will also show up here in the mixer. Now, just like the track header components, you can hide and show these. You can also hide and show your channel strip components. To do that, right click or control click on an empty area on any track, and then you can go to channel strip components and you can hide and show any of the parameters that I go over in this video. So if you don't see your input, that's how you can hide and show your input. If you don't see your icons, if you don't see your outputs, that's the way you can do that. Just channel strip components, and then you can hide and show those components. On the far right side of the mixer, you'll see 2 additional channel strips which are not shown in the tracks area. These are the stereo output and the master VCA, or sometimes I call it the master fader. If you've ever used a live mixing console, all of the tracks in the console go to a master output, usually on the right side of the board, and that you can use to sort of trim the total, the combined output of the mixer. That's really what the stereo output is in Logic's mixer. It sums the level of all of the tracks down to a single channel. And you can see that on the tracks because on the output section, you can see these are all going to the stereo output. Now you can change the output to go to a different output or go to a bus, which we'll talk about later, but by default, all of your tracks are going to go to the stereo output. Another thing that the stereo output will show you is it'll show you the peak level of the summed signal of all of the tracks in your mix. And it shows it right here. So if you click on that, you can see it resets that value, not only on the stereo output, but on individual channels. So if I just want to play this section here and we can monitor the peak signal level, so you can see the maximum peak there was negative 0.6 dB. And you can see that all of the values are in negatives. That's a good thing. That means that the signal is not peaking or clipping. If you start seeing positive values, that means that the channel is clipping or peaking. And generally speaking, you do not want your stereo output to peak or clip. So for example, if I take the level of all of my instruments here and pull them up, you're going to see that the stereo output clips. So you can see there it's clipping by 1.3 dB. So probably what I want to do is bring these other instruments back down so that my mix doesn't clip. And I'll do kind of a deep dive on what these values actually mean and what dBFS is full scale toward the end of this video. So we'll talk more about those signal levels later on. Now, the Master VCA is an additional control source for controlling the volume of the stereo output or all of the combined outputs. It's a little bit confusing because not all DAWs have both a stereo output and a master fader. The master fader, Master VCA, doesn't actually pass any signal through it. It's just a control source to control everything in the project. And you'll see it's doubled up here at the top. It's sort of like your master volume control. But in a lot of ways, the stereo output can also sort of function as a master volume control. For now, just keep both of these at 0. This is called unity, so it means no added or reduced gain. And to set those to unity, you can just hold Option and click on the faders to set them to unity. For now, just keep them at unity. Make sure that your stereo output is not clipping. There are some situations where you may want to adjust these levels. In particular, if you're like fading in or fading out a whole song, you would do that on your Master VCA. Next, let's talk about selecting channels and some of these channel options up here. So if you want to select just one channel, you can just select that channel on any of the empty spots on the channel. You can also press the left and right arrow keys to sort of jump around in the mixer channel to channel. And if you want to select multiple channels, one way to do this is to select the first channel, then hold Shift and select the last channel that you want to select. And when you have multiple channels selected, you can control all of their volumes together, you can control their pans together, and you can even control their mute and solo options. And by the way, the shortcut for mute, which was M, and the shortcut for solo, which is S, also work here in the mixer. So if I just want to solo all of my drums, I could do that. Or maybe I want to just solo all of my synthesizers. Another way to select multiple channels is to just click and drag over a selection of channels, just like so. You can do this at the very bottom of the channel strip. You can do it at the top here. You can really do it anywhere where there's an open spot on the channel strip, so you can click and swipe that way as well. And if you just want to select certain channels, like maybe I just want to select this one, and this one, you hold Command while selecting those channels, and it'll only select those channels. So I can solo just these 3 channels. Except there's nothing playing on this one. Let's go with the piano rhythms instead. So again, click on the first one, hold Command and click, hold Command and click, and there we go. Up at the top, you'll see some options to hide and show certain tracks in the mixer. Most of the time here in the middle, I have this set to tracks. And what that means is that all of the tracks that are in the tracks area are going to be shown in the mixer, except for the stereo output and master fader, which are not out here in the tracks area. However, if I select just one track and then go to single, it will only show me that selected track plus the stereo output and master fader. The last option here, all, will show you all tracks in your project, including ones that are hidden or ones that are inside of track stacks. So for example, the drum machine designer kit I have up here, you may recall from a previous video that DMD kits are actually packed into these folders called summing stacks, so that you can have individual control over each of the kit pieces in the drum kit. Now, if you have this open up here in the tracks area, or you click right here in the mixer, this will still open up all of those channels. So you can still get in here and control each of your kit pieces in the mixer. But if you're showing all tracks, it's not going to matter whether the track stack is open or not. And this will also show things like your click track volume level, so you can adjust the volume level of your metronome. So again, most of the time I'm working in tracks view here to show all of my visible tracks in the mixer. Additionally, over here, you can hide and show certain types of tracks. So you can hide and show audio tracks, instrument tracks. If you're using aux tracks or buses, you can hide and show the output, hide and show the master VCA and other VCAs. And MIDI is going to be external MIDI tracks, which I don't have any of those in this project. And in the upper right corner, there are two views. This one is the narrow channel strip view, but if you click here, you'll get a wide channel strip view. Most of the time when I have a lot of tracks in a project, I'll keep this on narrow, but if you just have a few tracks in the project, you can use the wide view. Okay, next up, I want to give you an overview of all of the most commonly used channel strip components. Remember, if you need to hide or show your channel strip components, you can right click or control click on a channel, go to channel strip components to hide or show them, or you can also go to view channel strip components and you can hide and show them from here. So I'm just going to start at the top with the channel strip setting and work my way down. So up at the very top, this is called a channel strip setting. Channel strip settings are a great way to save channel presets with different instruments and effects, and it makes it really easy to recall these things for later. So for example, I've got these tom fills here. Let's check out what these sound like right now. And so on this track, this is a quick sampler instrument. There is an EQ, and then I've got the Chroma Glow plugin on here as well. And let's go ahead and add one more effect on here. Let's add Chroma Verb just for a little bit of reverb. Now, if I want to save this as a channel strip setting, you just come up here to the top, click on it, and then select Save Channel Strip Setting As. And then you give it a name. I'll call this Big Toms 2. And then let's say that I reset this channel strip. So if you just click on the channel strip setting, go up to reset channel strip. Now that track is blank. I've got no instrument. I'm not going to hear anything when I press play now. What I can do is I can go up to the channel strip setting and find that channel strip setting that I saved. So I have Big Tom 2 here among a bunch of other presets that I've already saved. And it recalls the instrument and all of the effects. So I can quickly recall that channel strip setting for later. These are great for saving mixing presets and saving your favorite instrument settings. Next up is the gain reduction meter. You're only going to see a gain reduction meter on tracks where the compressor plugin is loaded up. Essentially what the gain reduction meter does is it shows you the amount of gain reduction being applied by the compressor. So I've got this synth bass here where the kick drum is sort of ducking the bass sound with the compressor. And you'll see as the compressor applies gain reduction, you'll see gain reduction on the gain reduction meter as well. So we'll talk more about using compressors later on in the course. But for now, just note that the gain reduction meter shows you how much gain reduction is happening within a compressor plugin. The next channel strip component is the EQ display. You'll see a few of these already have a display here, and that's because these channels have the channel EQ or the linear phase EQ loaded up. So this is just a quick visual way to see what the EQ setting looks like on that track. You can also add EQ this way. So for example, if I want to take my piano rhythms track here and I want to add EQ to it, I can double click on that EQ display and it'll automatically load up the channel EQ, and then I can dial in a setting I like. And you can see that EQ curve there in the EQ display. And it's just a quick way to open up the channel EQ as well. Next up is the MIDI effects insert. This will only be shown on compatible MIDI type tracks, really software instrument tracks. So for example, I've got some chords here, and they just sound like this. If I wanted to give these chords some motion, I could load up a MIDI effects plugin. In particular, the arpeggiator is very useful for this. And I'll choose a preset from up here. Let's try this classic cycle 1 preset. So MIDI effects transform the MIDI signal before the MIDI is received by the software instrument. And there's a lot of different MIDI effects you can choose from, with the arpeggiator, chord trigger, modulator, and note repeater being the ones I use most of the time, but there are a ton of different things you can do in here. If you're interested in learning about these MIDI effects, I have individual tutorials on each one of these MIDI effects plugins on my YouTube channel, and I'll be covering them again in future courses. Next up is the input. We kind of already talked about this. If you see a green insert here, this means that you have a software instrument. So like here I have retro synth. I can click on the middle of that insert and it opens up the retro synth. You can also bypass by hovering over the left side and clicking. And you can also click on the right side, load up no plugin, or you can choose an available plugin from Logic's stock instrument library. Let's try out Alchemy on this track. And within Alchemy, you can choose presets from up here from the main menu, but many instruments, especially third-party instruments, will have their own preset menu built into the plugin. So that Aquatic Ghosts preset is kind of cool. And you can also hold Option and click anywhere on that instrument insert to bypass it and activate it. Now with audio tracks, you're just going to see an input. Remember, this is just going to be an input where you can select where you want to record from, what channel on your audio interface do you have your microphone or microphones plugged into. If you see 2 channels at a time, like 1, 2, 3, 4, that means that this is receiving a stereo input. If you click here, you're converting the track to mono and you're only going to receive 1 channel. Now, we already talked about this when I did the video on recording with a microphone, but that's the only thing you're ever going to see at the top of an audio track is the input. Next up, we have our audio effects. So these are effects that come after the software instruments, and these are ways to transform or enhance instruments, or you can use them to enhance audio recordings. These are really great for mixing to get the most life out of your recordings and instruments. So we already talked about one type of audio effect, and that was the channel EQ. To add effects manually from the effects inserts, just click, and then you'll see a list of all the different types of effects that Logic has. You'll also see your most recent effects at the top. For the channel EQ, I can go down to EQ, and then here's channel EQ. I'll load it up in stereo, and then I can customize the tone of this instrument. And I can add other effects as well. Maybe I want to add some reverb. I'll click here, go down to reverb. Let's try out this one called Chromaverb. And within the Chromaverb plugin, I can choose different types of reverbs. Let's try out the Synth Hall. And you can also load up third-party effects. So if you've downloaded or purchased any third-party effects, you can load these up as well. So instead of using Chromaverb, let's click here, go down to audio units, and you'll see all of the manufacturers that you have installed. Go to your manufacturer of choice, and maybe let's add some sort of like a cool delay. I'll use the Native Instruments replica delay. And And you can also load up third-party instruments the same way. If you click on the right side of any existing stock Logic instrument, you can go down to the bottom and you'll see AU instruments. You'll see all the different manufacturers, and I can choose a third-party instrument. So for example, maybe I want to use ANA2 by Sonic Academy. And again, what you'll find is in many third-party instruments, you may or may not have a set of presets up here at the top in this menu. The instrument may have its own library of presets built into the interface. And just like with your instrument inserts, if you click on the left side of the plugin, you can bypass those effects plugins. You can also click and swipe to turn on or turn off multiple plugins. You click in the middle to open up the plugin itself, and you click on the right side to either remove that plugin or select a different one. And you can also hold Option and click to bypass as well. Now, if you want to move an effect over to another channel, you can do that just by clicking and dragging, but you can also hold Option to duplicate an effect over to other channels. And if you have an effect on multiple channels and you want to bypass or activate that effect on that specific insert slot, you can select multiple channels and you can bypass all of them at the same time, or you can just make a selection and you can remove those plugins all at once. Now, you've probably noticed that when I load up an audio effects plugin, that it automatically opens up the plugin window. This will also happen for software instruments. But if you don't want that to happen, you can change this in the settings. Just go up to Logic Pro Settings and then go down to View. And from here, go to Mixer. And you'll see an option here that says Open Plugin Window on Insertion. If you turn that off, the next time you load up a plugin, you'll notice that it does not open up the plugin window automatically. You instead have to click on it to open it up. Now, another option here that's pretty helpful is the Show Recent Plugin List in Plugin menu. So this applies for both your audio effects along with your software instruments. So your most recent instruments and effects will show up at the top of the list. If you don't want to waste that space in the list, you can just turn this option off and you'll no longer see your most recent plugins in the plugin lists. I tend to like to keep both of these options on, especially the recent plugin list, because if I'm using a lot of the same plugins, I can very easily go and grab them without having to search through a menu or come down to the audio units. This is especially helpful for third-party plugins. For this video, we're going to skip the sends, output, group assignments, and automation. Most of these we're going to come back to in future videos in this course. We'll talk about sends and outputs and using buses in a video coming very soon. These are great for routing signal over to auxiliary channel strips or aux tracks, where you can load up time-based effects, things like reverbs, delays, modulation. These are really handy for mixing. The output just assigns where the track is assigned to. By default, these should all go to the stereo output, but they can be routed to other locations. The group assignments are great when you need to group together or link together parameters of different tracks, like maybe you want to control the volume of multiple tracks at the same time, or the pan, or the solo, or the mute, or even editing. But unfortunately, groups are pretty outside the scope of this course. Automation, we're going to come back to in this course as well. That'll have its own dedicated video. So let's move down to the pan knobs, the faders, and meters. So pan may seem kind of simple, but it's actually a really oversimplified topic. You may think that pan just controls the position of an instrument in your mix, and you're not wrong. You can make an instrument go more to the left or more to the right. And then if you want to reset the pan knob to center, you hold Option and click on it. Now, Logic still uses MIDI values for its pan knobs. So you'll see far left is -64, far right is +63, and then right in the center, I guess, is 0. So it's a 128 interval positioning, like many other MIDI messages. But on stereo tracks like this, if you right click or control click on a pan knob, you'll see that there's actually 3 options here: stereo pan balance, which is selected by default, and binaural panner. Binaural panning is way outside the scope of this course, so we're not even going to talk about it. But let's talk about the difference between balancers and stereo panners. So a stereo balancer essentially means that when you turn the knob to the left, you're reducing the volume in the right channel to make it seem like it's more in the left side of the mix. And if I pull this over to the right, we're reducing the left channel to make it seem like it's more in the right side of the mix. The problem with stereo balancers is that if you hard pan anything, you're actually losing content. If I push this over to the left, I'm losing content from the right side. If I push this over to the right, I'm losing content from the left side. So what stereo pan does is this gives you independent control over the position of the left and right channels. So now when I pull this over to the left, all it's doing is it's pushing the right channel over to the left rather than reducing its volume. So you can hear there with the stereo pan, we're losing less information. So we're still preserving all of the information in both the left and right channels. We're just repositioning them in a different location. Another really cool thing you can do with stereo panners that you can't do with balancers is you can click on the little green bar here and drag up or down to sort of narrow that channel in the mix or make it more wide in the mix. So this allows you to really focus your localization of an instrument. If I want this instrument to be very narrow and in a very specific place in the stereo field, like slightly right and not taking up quite as much space in the stereo field, I can do that. Or maybe I want to reduce the stereo width of a track. This one's got this big stereo tremolo effect on it now. I can narrow that stereo panning position and make this track more focused in the center and make less out of that stereo effect. And again, you can hold Option and click to reset. Another thing you can do with stereo panners that you can't do with balancers is you can hold Command and click on them and they'll turn orange. And basically all this means is the left and right channels have been swapped. So left is now on the right and right is now on the left. This is really helpful if you're working with 2 microphone stereo recordings and you want to swap the position of the 2 microphones in the stereo field. Now, if I create a new mono track, so you can see this is mono right up here, you'll notice that there's only 2 options, pan and binaural panner. There's no option for stereo pan because a mono track only has 1 channel. So there's no point in having a stereo balancer on a mono track because a mono pan knob is just controlling the position of 1 channel. And lastly, I want to finish up with the volume faders and metering. Specifically, what do digital audio metering values mean? Just about everyone knows that sound can be measured in decibels, or dB for short. Depending on specifically what type of sound or audio you are metering or measuring, you will see different reference values for the decibel. Sound pressure level is measured in dB/SPL. Acoustical measurements are often made in dBA or dBC. These are different weightings of SPL. Or in audio electronics, it's common to see values in dBV or dBU. So because the decibel is a relative unit, it requires a reference value. The decibel on its own is a meaningless unit unless you have a reference value to compare it to. And each of these examples have different reference values. Now, in digital audio systems and DAWs, volume is measured in dBFS, which stands for full scale, so decibels relative to full scale. Full scale represents the maximum volume that can be contained within a digital audio recording or a digital audio file. Remember earlier when we talked about clipping or peaking? When the volume of a track goes above 0.0 dB, that means it's going past its maximum volume. So with full scale values, 0.0 dBFS means that is the maximum volume. So when working with meters and faders and DAWs, you'll notice most of the numbers go down in negative values. So for example, -6 dBFS means 6 decibels lower than full scale. And by the way, you don't have to keep saying dBFS. Most people just say dB. The FS is implied. So let's check this out on the stereo output in my project here. I'm just going to play back the project and let it run in the background so we can get some metering levels. So the value on the right shows you the peak level in dBFS of a particular track, and the value on the left shows you how much added or reduced gain you are adding to that channel with the fader. So if I pull up all of these instruments, you'll see that eventually the value will get up to and above 0.0, so above full scale. So this is called clipping or peaking. If I were to bounce or export this whole project as an audio file right now, parts of the audio are going to be truncated or cut off. This can also cause audible distortion. So think of 0.0 dB as sort of like a ceiling where you shouldn't go any higher. The good news about modern DAWs is that the resolution of the mixing engine of the DAW is much higher than the resolution of the audio files you record and much higher than the resolution of the final audio file you might bounce or export to. So this gives you some wiggle room to work with when mixing. It's very possible to have a track clip, but you can very easily recover that clip or just pull it down, as long as you haven't clipped an actual audio recording on input. Whereas on an analog mixing console, you cannot do this, although analog clipping and digital clipping are two very different things. Now, when you see the meters to the right of the faders, this is what's called post-fader metering. It means that the metering is coming after the fader adjustment. So logically, if I pull this up, you will see the meters go up. If you pull the faders down, you'll see the meters move down. However, you can actually change this. If you go up to Mix and then select Pre-Fader Metering, you'll see that the meters and faders swap places. And you can see that one of my tracks is actually clipping. So this is showing the signal level of the track before it even gets to the faders. And if I pull down the faders or pull up the faders, you'll see it has no effect on the shown signal level in the meters. You will still hear an audible difference, but it's just that the meters are representing the audio that's coming through the instruments and through all three of these effects. So it doesn't matter how much I reduce the volume of this track, it's always going to be clipping unless I make an adjustment to the instrument itself or one of the effects that's on the track. So for example, in the channel EQ, I could maybe pull down the gain a little bit here, the total gain, and then now you'll see that the signal level is no longer clipping. Now, there are some specific uses for using pre-fader metering over post-fader metering. For mixing, generally, I can go both ways. Sometimes I'll use one, sometimes I'll use another. For recording, though, I almost always use pre-fader metering because it allows me to get a measurement of the signal on input, even if I've made a change to the fader. So I can make sure that my input signal is not clipping in the DAW. Now, one very last thing I want to cover about the mixers, just one of the weird quirks about most DAW mixers. For the most part, the signal flow of a channel strip from the top to the bottom is fairly accurate. But one of the things that is a little misleading is the pan knob comes before the faders and meters. In actuality, the pan knobs come after the faders, even though they're visually shown before the faders. This will come into play as we start talking about different types of sends: post-pan, post-fader, and pre-fader sends. But for now, just know that the pan knobs come after the volume faders. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.